Emily Dawson had a knack for making chaos disappear. If you glanced at her during one of her events, you might mistake her calm, polished exterior for someone living an effortless life. Her delicate smile, the confident way she carried herself, and her quiet tone gave people the impression she was just another behind-the-scenes worker, blending into the backdrop of a perfect event. But looks could be deceiving. Emily wasn't just any wedding planner, she was the wedding planner. The kind of person you called when you wanted magic, even if your budget and timeline said otherwise. Her days were spent weaving together the impossible, ensuring every bride and groom felt like their day was nothing short of a fairy tale. Yet, for all her hard work, Emily had grown used to being underestimated. "Oh, you're the planner? I thought you'd be older," clients would often say with a chuckle. Or worse, "You're awfully small to manage something so big." She never let it show, but those remarks cut deeper than she cared to admit. Today, however, Emily had no time for self-doubt. The sprawling country estate where the latest wedding was set to unfold looked like something out of a romantic movie. White tents billowed in the soft summer breeze, the gardens sparkled under strings of fairy lights, and a live string quartet rehearsed in the corner. Guests would arrive in less than 2 hours, and there was still a long list of last-minute fixes. One centerpiece was missing, a bridesmaid's dress had mysteriously gone missing, and the DJ was stuck in traffic. But Emily? She was unfazed. "Lena," Emily called to her assistant, who was frantically typing on her phone, "double-check with catering about the timing for the desserts. And find that missing dress before the bride notices." Lena nodded, her panic softened by Emily's calm voice. That was Emily's gift, her ability to radiate serenity, even when the world seemed to be spinning out of control. Still, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that today was different. She had planned dozens of weddings before, ones with runaway grooms, cake collapses, and even power outages. But something about this day felt off. Her thoughts were interrupted by the low, unmistakable growl of engines in the distance. At first, she ignored it, focused on retying the ribbons on the gift table. But the sound grew louder. And closer. The roar of motorcycles shattered the serene atmosphere of the estate, drawing every eye toward the entrance gates. A dozen bikes rolled in like a thunderstorm, their riders clad in leather jackets and heavy boots. The peaceful gardens and pastel-colored decor suddenly felt out of place, as though two worlds were colliding. Emily straightened, her mind racing. She glanced toward the bride's parents, who were standing near the cocktail bar. Their expressions went from confusion to alarm as the riders parked their bikes and began dismounting, their laughter loud and boisterous. "What is this?" Mrs. Beaumont, the mother of the bride, hissed as she rushed over to Emily. Her pearls trembled with every sharp movement. "Who are they? I thought this was a private event." "It is," Emily replied calmly, though her stomach tightened. She had dealt with pushy vendors and nosy relatives before, but this was new. She took a deep breath. "I'll handle it." As Emily approached the group, she quickly assessed the situation. They were rough around the edges, their leather jackets covered in patches, and they had the kind of swagger that came with knowing they intimidated people. Most of the bikers ignored her, laughing and joking as though they were in a bar, not at a wedding. But one of them, a tall man with a scruffy beard and sunglasses, noticed her. He tilted his head, a smirk spreading across his face. "You lost, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery. Emily smiled politely, though her eyes were sharp. "This is a private event. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The man chuckled, glancing back at his group as though sharing a private joke. "Oh, we're not here to crash the party. We're just enjoying the view." His tone made it clear he didn't plan to leave anytime soon. Emily folded her arms, her expression remaining calm but firm. "This is someone's wedding day. You're disrupting it. Please, respect the occasion and leave now." The biker leaned closer, invading her space. "And if we don't?" he asked, his grin widening. For a brief moment, Emily felt the weight of the situation. She was one woman against a dozen men who clearly didn't care about rules or etiquette. The staff had started whispering among themselves, and even the string quartet had gone silent, their instruments hanging awkwardly at their sides. All eyes were on her. But Emily wasn't about to back down. "You won't want to find out," she said softly, her voice steady. The biker paused, his smirk faltering ever so slightly. There was something in her tone, a quiet confidence that didn't match her petite frame or soft demeanor. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, another voice rang out. "Emily, is everything okay here?" It was Victor, one of the groomsmen, and he was flanked by two other men who were equally broad-shouldered and imposing. They had noticed the commotion and were now standing firmly behind her, their presence alone enough to make the bikers hesitate. Emily nodded, though she didn't look away from the man in front of her. "I've asked them to leave." The biker leader glanced between her and the groomsman, weighing his options. Finally, he held up his hands in mock surrender. All right. No need to get worked up." He turned to his group and gestured for them to back off. "Let's go. This place is boring anyway." As the bikers revved their engines and rode away, Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The tension in the air slowly dissipated, and the chatter of guests resumed. Victor gave her a curious look. "That was brave. You okay?" Emily smiled faintly, brushing a stray hair from her face. "I'm fine. Just another day on the job." But as she turned back to her checklist, her mind was already racing. Who were those men, and why had they come here? She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last she'd see of them. And while the day continued without further interruptions, Emily couldn't help but glance toward the gates every now and then, wondering what kind of storm she had just stepped into. Emily tried to shake off the encounter, but the strange unease it left behind lingered. She had faced plenty of difficult situations before, disasters both natural and man-made, but something about those bikers gnawed at her. Their mocking smirks, the deliberate way they'd parked their bikes as though they belonged, and the way their leader had looked at her half amused, half challenging stayed in her mind like a splinter she couldn't quite remove. "Miss Dawson," Mrs. Beaumont called sharply, interrupting her thoughts. The bride's mother had an uncanny ability to materialize whenever there was even the slightest inconvenience. "The florist just informed me they're one arrangement short, and I simply won't stand for it. My daughter deserves perfection." Emily nodded, already shifting gears. "I'll handle it, Mrs. Beaumont," she said with her signature calm. "You'd better," Mrs. Beaumont huffed, her pearls clinking as she stormed off toward the cocktail bar. As Emily directed Lena to call the florist and arrange for a replacement, her eyes drifted toward the venue gates again. The bikers were gone, but the rumble of their engines seemed to echo in her memory. Who were they? Why had they chosen this wedding of all places? It couldn't have been a coincidence. She shook her head. No, she couldn't afford to get distracted. Not today. There were far too many things to oversee, and the last thing she needed was to let her imagination get the better of her. The ceremony began without a hitch. The bride walked down the aisle in a vision of white lace, her face glowing with happiness as the string quartet played a soft rendition of Pachelbel's Canon in D. Emily watched from the sidelines, her practiced eyes scanning every detail. She noted the timing of the music, the placement of the flower girls, and even the way the sunlight hit the bride's veil just right. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of pride. This was why she loved her job, the magic of a moment that couldn't be replicated. But as the vows began, Emily's gaze drifted toward the tree line just beyond the garden. For a split second, she thought she saw movement. A figure in black, partially hidden by the shadows. Her heart skipped a beat, but when she blinked and looked again, there was nothing there. "Get a grip," she muttered under her breath, forcing herself to focus on the ceremony. The last thing she needed was to spiral into paranoia. By the time the reception began, the tension in Emily's chest had lessened. The guests were enjoying the hors d'oeuvres, the speeches had gone smoothly, and the DJ who had arrived just in time had the dance floor buzzing with energy. Emily stood by the bar, sipping a glass of water as she observed the crowd. This was her favorite part of any wedding, the moment when all the stress and planning melted away, and she could see the joy on everyone's faces. Emily. Lena's voice cut through the hum of conversation, and Emily turned to see her assistant hurrying toward her. "What's wrong?" Emily asked, immediately on alert. Lena glanced around, lowering her voice. "I thought you should know. One of the caterers said they saw someone near the storage area in the back. A man. He didn't look like he belonged here." Emily's stomach tightened. "Did they say what he looked like?" Lena nodded, her expression anxious. "Tall, wearing a leather jacket. He left before anyone could ask him anything." Emily's grip on her glass tightened. "Did you tell security?" "They're looking into it now," Lena said. "But I thought you'd want to know." "Thank you," Emily said, her voice calm despite the unease spreading through her. She set her glass down and moved toward the back of the venue, her heels clicking softly against the stone pathway. The storage area was tucked away behind the main building, hidden from the view of the guests. It was where the extra chairs, decorations, and supplies were kept, nothing particularly valuable, but important enough to the success of the event. Emily stepped into the dimly lit space, her eyes scanning the shelves and crates. Everything seemed in place, but the faint smell of cigarette smoke lingered in the air. "Hello," she called, her voice firm. Silence. Emily frowned, her gaze sweeping the area one more time. She was about to leave when something caught her eye, a small scrap of paper on the ground near the door. She picked it up and frowned. It was an old receipt, crumpled and worn, but the logo at the top made her stomach flip. It was from a bar in town, one she recognized as a popular hangout for bikers. Her fingers tightened around the receipt as a dozen questions raced through her mind. Why had they been here? What were they looking for? And more importantly, were they planning to come back? Emily didn't mention the receipt to anyone. Not yet. She couldn't afford to stir up panic, especially not with the reception in full swing. Instead, she slipped the paper into her pocket and returned to the party, her mind working overtime. The bikers' appearance had been unsettling enough, but the idea that they might still be lingering nearby was even worse. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just random troublemakers. As she walked through the crowd, checking on the bride and groom, she couldn't help but feel like she was being watched. The feeling was faint, like a whisper at the edge of her senses, but it was there. Her gaze darted toward the tree line again. This time, she was certain she saw movement, a shadow slipping between the trees. Emily's jaw tightened. If they thought they could intimidate her, they were wrong. The night wore on, and the reception continued without incident. The guests danced under the stars, the laughter and music blending into a symphony of celebration. Emily stayed vigilant, her eyes constantly scanning the edges of the venue. It wasn't until the last of the guests had departed and the staff began cleaning up that the real trouble began. Emily was in the main hall, checking the final details, when she heard a loud crash from outside. Her heart leaped into her throat as she rushed toward the sound. When she stepped out into the cool night air, her worst fears were confirmed. The bikers were back. The sight was surreal. Their motorcycles were lined up in the driveway like a makeshift barricade, their engines rumbling softly. The leader's scruffy beard, sunglasses, and the same mocking smirk stood at the center, flanked by his crew. Emily squared her shoulders, refusing to let them see her fear. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The leader chuckled, his hands resting casually on his hips. "We didn't get a chance to say goodbye earlier," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Thought we'd swing by and pay our respects." "This is private property," Emily said firmly. "You need to leave. Now." The man took a step closer, his smirk widening. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said. "But we're not going anywhere." The standoff had begun. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the reception venue. Inside the sprawling banquet hall, the soft hum of conversation and laughter mingled with the clink of glasses and the cheerful notes of a live band. Everything seemed perfect, at least on the surface. Emily Dawson was in her element, calmly but firmly steering the day toward perfection. She had just ensured the bride's veil was safely tucked away and reassured the caterers about their tight dessert schedule when the distant rumble began. It was faint at first, blending with the ambient noise, but as it grew louder, it became impossible to ignore. A low, steady growl that sent vibrations through the ground and rippled the fragile air of celebration. Emily's ears perked up, her finely tuned instincts picking up on the disruption before anyone else. She stepped out of the hall to investigate, her heels clicking softly against the stone walkway. As she approached the venue's front gates, the source of the noise came into view. A line of motorcycles roared into the parking lot, their chrome gleaming in the fading light. The riders, leather-clad and unapologetically loud, parked their bikes in a haphazard row, taking up far more space than necessary. Their movements were deliberate, slow, as if daring someone to confront them. Emily froze for a moment, her heart skipping a beat. This wasn't just a casual group of bikers out for a ride. There was an edge to their presence, something that set her on high alert. Inside, the festivities continued, blissfully unaware of the disruption brewing just outside. Emily could hear the distant sound of the band tuning their instruments, the faint chatter of guests raising toasts. For a moment, she considered calling security, but something told her to handle this herself. She squared her shoulders and approached the group. The leader of the bikers was impossible to miss. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a scruffy beard and eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. A devilish smirk played on his lips as he leaned casually against his motorcycle, clearly in no rush to explain himself. The patches on his jacket told a story of a biker club with a reputation for trouble. "Excuse me," Emily began, her tone polite but firm. "This is a private event. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The leader tilted his head slightly, as if he hadn't quite heard her. Then, with exaggerated casualness, he removed his sunglasses and let his eyes settle on her. "And who are you, sweetheart?" he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "I'm the wedding planner," Emily said, standing her ground. The other bikers chuckled, a low rumble of amusement that only made her spine stiffen. One of them muttered something under his breath, earning another round of laughter. The leader pushed off his bike and took a step closer, towering over her. "The wedding planner, huh? Well, isn't that cute?" he said, smirking. "So, what are you gonna do? Call the bride on us?" Emily didn't flinch. She had dealt with plenty of difficult people in her career: overbearing parents, intoxicated guests, even the occasional overzealous photographer, but this was different. The disrespect was palpable, almost as though they wanted to provoke her. "This is someone's wedding day," she said, her voice calm but firm. "If you have no business here, I need you to leave." The leader leaned in closer, invading her space. "And if we don't?" His question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threats. Emily's heart raced, but she refused to let it show. Her calm demeanor had always been her greatest strength, and she wasn't about to let them see her sweat. "Then I'll have no choice but to involve the authorities," she said evenly. The smirk on his face faltered for a split second, but he recovered quickly. "You hear that, boys?" he called out, turning to his crew. "She's gonna call the cops on us." The group erupted into laughter, their voices echoing through the parking lot. Behind her, A few staff members had started to gather, their nervous whispers filling the air. Emily knew what they were thinking. She was out of her depth. Small, soft-spoken Emily Dawson, going toe-to-toe with a group of men who thrived on intimidation. But Emily wasn't backing down. "Look, lady," the leader said, his tone shifting from amused to annoyed. "We're just here for a little fun. No harm, no foul. Maybe we'll even stick around for a drink or two." "You're not welcome here," Emily replied, her voice steely. "Leave. Now." For a moment, the two locked eyes, a silent battle of wills playing out between them. Emily's calm defiance seemed to catch him off guard. He had expected her to crumble, to beg, or to retreat. Instead, she stood her ground, her unwavering gaze sending a clear message: she wasn't afraid of him. All right," the leader said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "We'll go. Wouldn't want to ruin anyone's special day." The bikers mounted their motorcycles one by one, their engines roaring to life. But as they pulled away, the leader shot her a parting look, his smirk returning. "We'll see you around, sweetheart," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Emily watched as they disappeared down the road, the sound of their bikes fading into the distance. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her hands trembling slightly. "Miss Dawson," one of the catering staff said nervously, approaching her. "Should we call the police?" Emily shook her head. "No. They're gone for now." But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The bride and groom were blissfully unaware of the near disruption, and Emily made sure it stayed that way. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying the encounter with the bikers over and over again. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had come here for a reason, and their casual departure felt more like a warning than a retreat. Later that night, as the last of the guests trickled out and the cleanup began, Emily found herself standing by the gates, staring out into the darkness. The faint smell of exhaust lingered in the air, a ghostly reminder of the day's events. Her assistant, Lena, approached hesitantly. "Emily. You've been standing here for a while. Everything okay?" Emily forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine," she said. "Just making sure everything's wrapped up." But as Lena walked away, Emily's thoughts remained heavy. She had always prided herself on being prepared for anything, but this was different. This wasn't a logistical problem she could solve with a phone call or a quick fix. This was a threat she couldn't ignore. And while the bikers might have left for now, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they'd be back. As the night progressed, Emily threw herself back into her work, checking on the caterers, ensuring the cleanup staff had all the supplies they needed, and double-checking the bride's departure schedule. Yet, no matter how much she tried to focus, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She replayed the encounter with the bikers in her mind, dissecting every word, every smirk, every lingering look. It wasn't just their arrogance or disrespect that unsettled her, it was the sense of calculation behind it. They hadn't stumbled into the venue by accident. They had been looking for something or someone. But why here? Why now? Emily glanced at her watch. It was nearly midnight. The last of the guests had left, the band had packed up, and only the staff remained, tidying up the aftermath of the day's festivities. Normally, this was Emily's favorite part of the job, a quiet moment to reflect on a job well done. But tonight, the silence felt oppressive. "Emily." Lena's voice startled her. Her assistant had a nervous energy about her, clutching a clipboard tightly to her chest. One of the servers said they thought they saw someone near the storage shed again. Emily's stomach tightened. Did they see who it was? Lena shook her head. No. Just a shadow, I think. But, should we check it out? Maybe call security. Emily hesitated. Her instincts told her to investigate, but she didn't want to alarm the staff any more than they already were. "I'll handle it," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "It's probably nothing." Lena looked unconvinced but nodded. "Be careful, okay?" Emily gave her a reassuring smile, though her pulse quickened as she walked toward the storage area. The storage shed sat at the edge of the property, tucked away near a line of tall trees that cast long, eerie shadows under the moonlight. Emily approached cautiously, her heels clicking softly on the gravel path. She paused at the door, her hand hovering over the handle as she listened for any sign of movement. The air was still, heavy with the faint scent of pine and the lingering smell of exhaust fumes from earlier. Emily pushed the door open slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside, everything seemed untouched. Rows of folding chairs were stacked neatly against the wall, boxes of decorations sat unopened, and the spare linens were still in their plastic wrapping. But something wasn't right. A faint glimmer caught her eye, a shard of glass on the floor, glinting in the moonlight streaming through the small window. Emily crouched to pick it up, her fingers brushing against the cool, jagged edge. It looked like a piece of a broken bottle, and nearby, she spotted a dark stain on the concrete floor. She straightened, her mind racing. The stain was dry, but it wasn't old. Someone had been here recently. Before she could dwell on it further, a rustling sound came from outside the shed. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. Slowly, she turned toward the door, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the threshold. "Hello," she called out, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. No response. She stepped outside, her heels crunching softly against the gravel as she peered into the shadows. The rustling grew louder, coming from the tree line a few yards away. "Who's there?" she demanded, her tone firmer this time. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was one of the bikers, a younger man with a shaved head and a tattoo snaking up his neck. He stopped a few feet away from her, his hands shoved casually into the pockets of his leather jacket. Well, he said, his voice low and mocking. "Fancy meeting you out here all alone." Emily's pulse quickened, but she stood her ground. "You're trespassing," she said, her tone as calm as she could manage. "You need to leave." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "You're a feisty one, aren't you? The boss said you'd be trouble." Emily's stomach tightened. "What do you want?" He didn't answer right away, his eyes raking over her with an unsettling intensity. Finally, he smirked. "Just making sure everything's secure. You know, in case we need to come back." Emily's jaw clenched. "If you or your friends come back, I'll make sure the police are waiting for you." The man's smirk faltered for a split second, but he recovered quickly. "You've got guts, lady. I'll give you that." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "But you might want to think twice before sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Before Emily could respond, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, his laughter echoing faintly in the night air. Emily returned to the main building, her hands trembling as she tried to process what had just happened. She knew she should call the authorities, but a part of her hesitated. The bikers hadn't done anything overtly criminal yet. And she couldn't shake the feeling that involving the police might escalate the situation. Instead, she decided to focus on securing the venue. She instructed the remaining staff to double-check all the locks and made sure the night security team was on high alert. As the hours ticked by, the staff gradually finished their cleanup duties and headed home, leaving Emily alone in the now empty venue. She sat at the bar, nursing a cup of coffee as she stared at the darkened windows. Her mind raced with questions. Why had the bikers chosen this wedding? What were they after? And why had they singled her out? She didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear, this wasn't over. The following morning, Emily returned to the venue, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. She started by reviewing the security footage from the previous night. The grainy black and white images showed the bikers' arrival, their arrogant swagger as they parked their motorcycles and confronted her at the gate. But what caught her attention was a brief moment later in the night. One of the cameras near the storage shed had captured the same biker she had encountered in the shadows. He wasn't alone. The footage showed him speaking to another man, a tall figure in a dark jacket who kept his face hidden from the camera. The two exchanged a few words before the second man handed the biker a small package. The biker slipped it into his jacket and walked away, leaving the second man to disappear into the woods. Emily's stomach churned. Whatever this was, it was bigger than she had realized. She leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She had spent years mastering the art of crisis management, but this was unlike anything she had faced before. It wasn't just about protecting the wedding or her reputation, it was about uncovering the truth and keeping everyone safe. And if the bikers thought they could intimidate her into silence, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The reception hall buzzed with nervous energy as the bikers strolled in, completely disregarding the disapproving stares and whispered protests from the guests. Their heavy boots thudded against the polished floor, a sharp contrast to the soft music and elegant decor. Emily stood near the bar, her expression calm but her mind racing. The bride and groom had yet to notice the intrusion, too caught up in the joy of their first dance. Emily intended to keep it that way. The leader, the same broad-shouldered man with the scruffy beard and mocking smile, sauntered toward the buffet table. He surveyed the spread like a king surveying his kingdom, then grabbed a plate without hesitation. "Fancy party," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the hum of conversation. "We figured we'd join in on the fun." A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. The guests exchanged nervous glances, some whispering to one another, while others tried to look away, pretending not to notice. Emily moved closer, her heels clicking softly on the tiled floor. She didn't speak, not yet. Instead, she observed, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. The way the leader's crew spread out across the room, each of them staking a claim to their territory. The way one of them casually snatched a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, downing it in one gulp before tossing the empty glass onto the floor with a careless laugh. Her staff looked to her for guidance, their expressions a mix of fear and confusion. Emily gave a small nod, a silent signal to stay calm and continue their work. She couldn't afford panic, not now. The leader caught sight of her and grinned, waving her over. "Hey, wedding planner. Why don't you come say hello?" Emily didn't hesitate. She walked toward him with steady steps, her head held high and her face a mask of professionalism. "I already told you, this is a private event," she said, her voice firm but even. "You're not welcome here." The leader chuckled, leaning casually against the buffet table. "Oh, come on, sweetheart. Don't be like that. We're just having a little fun." Emily's gaze didn't waver. "You've had your fun. Now it's time for you to leave." The room fell silent, all eyes on the confrontation unfolding in the center of the hall. Even the band had stopped playing, their instruments resting in an awkward hush. One of the bikers, a wiry man with a patch over one eye, let out a bark of laughter. "You've got guts, lady. I'll give you that." Another chimed in, twirling a centerpiece he'd swiped from a table like a trophy. "Yeah, but guts ain't gonna get you far." Emily ignored their taunts, her focus locked on the leader. He was the key. If she could get through to him, the rest would follow. But he wasn't backing down. Instead, he took a step closer, towering over her. "You think you can boss us around?" he asked, his voice low and threatening. "You've got no idea who you're dealing with." Emily's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to show it. She had faced chaos before: crying brides, feuding families, power outages in the middle of ceremonies. This was just another crisis to manage. "You're right," she said calmly. I don't know who you are. And I don't care. What I do care about is making sure this wedding goes off without any more disruptions. So either you leave on your own, or I'll make sure you're escorted out. The leader stared at her for a long moment, his smirk fading slightly. Behind her, she could feel the tension in the room, the collective breath everyone seemed to be holding. Finally, he laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. "You've got some fire, I'll give you that," he said, stepping back. "All right, boys. Let's not ruin the ladies' party." The bikers began to retreat, but not before making a show of it. They grabbed handfuls of food from the buffet, their laughter echoing through the hall as they made their way to the door. Emily didn't relax until the last of them was gone. She let out a slow breath, her hands trembling slightly as she turned back to the staff. "Let's get everything cleaned up," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "The night isn't over yet." The guests gradually returned to their conversations, though the mood had shifted. The incident had left an uneasy mark on the evening, one that even the most enthusiastic toasts couldn't entirely erase. Emily, however, didn't have time to dwell on it. She was already moving, her mind racing as she quietly gave instructions to her staff. She wanted to ensure there were no lingering signs of the bikers' presence, no broken glasses or scattered food to remind anyone of the disruption. But as the night wore on, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Later, as she walked through the venue, double-checking every detail, she noticed something out of place. A crumpled napkin near the bar, stained with grease. She picked it up, her brows furrowing as she noticed the faint imprint of a logo, a skull surrounded by flames. It was the same emblem she had seen on the bikers' jackets. Her heart sank. They had left a mark, a reminder that they had been there. It wasn't just a careless piece of trash, it was a message. Emily's fingers tightened around the napkin as a surge of determination coursed through her. She wasn't going to let them intimidate her. Not tonight, not ever. By the time the bride and groom left for their honeymoon, the venue was back to its pristine state, every trace of the bikers meticulously erased. But Emily couldn't shake the sense of unease that lingered like a shadow at the edge of her thoughts. As she stood by the exit, watching the last of the staff leave for the night, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her brows furrowing as she saw the message. "Nice party, sweetheart. Hope we didn't spoil it for you. See you soon." There was no sender listed, but she didn't need one. She knew exactly who it was from. Emily stared at the screen, her jaw tightening as a spark of defiance lit in her chest. She didn't know what game the bikers were playing, but one thing was clear: they had underestimated her. And that was their first mistake. The days that followed were a blur of planning and preparation. Emily knew she couldn't face this threat unprepared, so she began to gather her resources. She reached out to trusted colleagues, subtly inquiring about extra security measures and discreetly researching the biker gang that had disrupted the wedding. She learned their name, the Inferno Riders, and their reputation. They weren't just a group of troublemakers, they were a tightly knit gang with a history of intimidation and petty crime. But Emily wasn't intimidated. She had faced chaos before, and she knew how to turn even the most impossible situations to her advantage. She began making quiet changes to her operations, implementing stricter security protocols and training her staff to handle emergencies. She didn't tell anyone the full story, not yet. She wanted to be prepared before making her move. And as the days turned into weeks, Emily's determination grew stronger. She wasn't just planning to protect her events, she was planning to fight back. Because if the Inferno Riders thought they could mess with her, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The weeks following the incident at the wedding were far from ordinary. Though outwardly, Emily's life seemed to return to its usual whirlwind of appointments, vendor calls, and meticulous planning, beneath the surface, something had shifted. The message from the bikers lingered like a thorn in her mind. She hadn't replied, of course. That would have been playing into their hands. But their audacity and their confidence fueled her determination to not just handle them, but to outmaneuver them entirely. Emily began to notice small signs that they were watching her. A black motorcycle parked across the street from her office, its rider helmeted and motionless, as though waiting for something or someone. A faint trail of tire tracks at the edge of the venue property after an event, leading off into the woods. She didn't let it shake her. If anything, it sharpened her resolve. She had a job to do, and no gang of leather-clad thugs was going to stop her. It was a late Saturday afternoon, the golden hour casting a warm glow over the sprawling vineyard where Emily's latest event was set to unfold. The bride, a radiant young woman named Callie, had been dreaming of this day for years, and Emily was determined to make sure it was perfect. But as the guests began to arrive, Emily's sharp eyes caught a figure lingering near the edge of the property. He was standing just outside the gate, his posture casual but deliberate, like someone who wanted to be noticed without appearing obvious. It was him. The leader of the Inferno Riders. Emily's stomach tightened, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she signaled discreetly to her assistant, Lena. "Get the security team," she whispered. "I want them to keep an eye on the gate. No one comes in without an invitation." Lena nodded and hurried off, leaving Emily to return her attention to the event. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, not with the bikers so close. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Callie and her groom exchanged vows beneath a canopy of ivy and roses, their voices trembling with emotion as their families looked on with teary smiles. For a moment, the world seemed perfect. But as the guests moved to the reception area, Emily noticed the biker leader again. He hadn't left. Instead, he had been joined by two others, their silhouettes just visible through the wrought iron fence. Her jaw tightened. She couldn't let them ruin this. Emily made her way to the gate, her steps confident despite the unease churning in her gut. She approached the bikers with the same calm professionalism she had shown at the last wedding, her expression unreadable. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. The leader grinned, leaning casually against the gate. "We were just admiring the view," he said, gesturing toward the vineyard with a sweep of his hand. "Beautiful place you've got here." "It's not mine," Emily replied. "But it is private property. If you don't have an invitation, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The grin widened. "You've got a habit of asking us to leave, don't you?" Emily didn't flinch. "And yet, you keep coming back. Why is that?" For a moment, the leader said nothing. He just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped closer, his hand gripping the top of the gate. "Maybe we just like you," he said, his voice low. "Or maybe we're looking for something. Either way, you might want to stop getting in our way." The threat hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. But Emily refused to back down. "Leave," she said, her voice cold as steel. "Now. Or I'll make sure the next thing you're looking at is the inside of a police station." The leader's grin faltered for a split second before he turned to his companions. "Come on, boys. Let's not waste our time." The three of them walked away, their boots crunching against the gravel path. But as they disappeared into the distance, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. After the vineyard wedding, Emily knew she needed to take action. The bikers weren't just a nuisance, they were a threat. But rather than let fear dictate her next steps, she decided to use the skills that had made her one of the most sought-after wedding planners in the region, her ability to stay 3 steps ahead. Her first move was to increase security at all her events. She hired an off-duty police officer to oversee every reception, blending in with the crowd while keeping a close eye on any suspicious activity. She also briefed her staff, instructing them on how to handle potential disruptions without alarming the guests. But Emily didn't stop there. She began to dig deeper into the Inferno riders, using her connections to gather information about the gang. What she discovered was both unsettling and enlightening. The Inferno riders weren't just random troublemakers, they had a reputation for intimidation and extortion, targeting small businesses and private events for quick cash. They thrived on fear, using their size and aggression to get what they wanted. But Emily wasn't afraid of them. She had faced her fair share of challenges, and she knew how to turn even the most chaotic situations to her advantage. One evening, as Emily was closing up her office, she found a note taped to her car windshield. It was written in messy, blocky handwriting and read, "Stay out of our way, or you'll regret it." Emily stared at the note, her jaw tightening. They were trying to scare her, to make her back down. But if the bikers thought she would roll over that easily, they clearly didn't know who they were dealing with. She carefully folded the note and slipped it into her bag, her mind already working on her next move. The final straw came during another wedding, this time at a picturesque lakeside resort. The bikers didn't just linger at the edge of the property, they crashed the event outright, riding their motorcycles onto the lawn and disrupting the reception with their loud engines and crude taunts. The bride was in tears, the groom furious, and the guests visibly shaken. Emily stepped in immediately, her voice calm but commanding as she instructed the staff to move the guests inside. She confronted the bikers head-on, standing between them and the resort entrance with a steady gaze. "This ends now," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You've made your point. Now leave, or I'll have you arrested for trespassing and harassment." The leader smirked, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He hadn't expected her to stand her ground, not after all their attempts to intimidate her. "You're playing with fire, lady," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Emily didn't blink. "So are you," she replied. The standoff lasted a few tense moments before the bikers finally relented, revving their engines and tearing off into the night. But as they disappeared, Emily knew this wasn't the end. The bikers thought they were untouchable. For weeks, they had taunted Emily, disrupting her events, intimidating her staff, and testing the limits of her patience. To them, she was just another soft-spoken woman, someone easy to push around. But they didn't know Emily Dawson. Not really. It was another high-profile wedding, held in the grand ballroom of a luxury hotel. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the air was thick with the scent of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. The event was a showcase of elegance, exactly the kind of thing Emily excelled at. But just as the reception was hitting its stride, the rumble of engines echoed through the street outside. The guests exchanged nervous glances, some of them shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Emily didn't even need to look. She knew who it was. The doors to the ballroom burst open, and in strolled the bikers, their heavy boots thudding against the polished floor. The leader, his leather jacket adorned with patches and chains, scanned the room with a smirk that oozed arrogance. Well, he drawled, his voice loud enough to silence the string quartet. "What a lovely party. Mind if we join?" The crowd murmured uneasily, the bride's mother clutching her pearls as one of the bikers casually swiped a flute of champagne from a passing waiter. Emily stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Her expression was calm, controlled, almost serene. "You're not welcome here," she said, her voice carrying across the room. The leader turned to her, his smirk widening. "And who's going to stop us?" "You." There was laughter from his crew, their voices loud and mocking. But Emily didn't flinch. "I'm only going to say this once," she said, her tone even. "Leave now, or you'll regret it." The leader raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Oh, sweetheart, I don't think you know who you're dealing with." He stepped closer, towering over her. "But let me spell it out for you. We don't take orders from anyone. Especially not someone like you." Emily met his gaze, unblinking. You're right. I don't know who you are. But you're about to find out exactly who I am. For a moment, there was silence. Then, with a snap of her fingers, everything changed. From seemingly nowhere, a group of security guards emerged, moving swiftly to surround the bikers. These weren't just hotel staff, they were professionals, each one built like a brick wall and clearly ready for action. The leader's smirk faltered as he glanced around, realizing they were outnumbered. But he wasn't ready to back down just yet. Nice try, he sneered. But we've dealt with worse. Emily crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. You might want to think twice about that. At her words, two more figures entered the room, plainclothes police officers with badges clipped to their belts. One of them held up a warrant. We've got enough on you and your crew to make this very unpleasant, the officer said. Trespassing, harassment, destruction of property, you name it. The leader turned back to Emily, his eyes narrowing. What did you do? Emily tilted her head, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. Did you really think I'd just stand by and let you ruin everything I've worked for? While you were busy making noise and throwing your weight around, I was documenting everything. Every threat, every disruption, every crime you committed at my events. And I made sure it all got to the right people. She pulled her phone from her pocket, tapping the screen to display a series of videos, footage of the bikers crashing weddings, stealing, and intimidating her staff and guests. Each clip was time-stamped and clear as day. Oh, and by the way, she added, her voice icy, this venue. My family owns it. So technically, you've been trespassing on private property this whole time. The leader's bravado crumbled. His crew shifted uneasily, their confidence evaporating as the weight of their situation sank in. The officers moved in, cuffing the bikers one by one as the guests watched in stunned silence. A few of them even began to clap, their initial fear giving way to admiration for Emily's courage and quick thinking. As the leader was led away, he shot one last glare at Emily. This isn't over, he growled. She met his gaze, unshaken. Oh, I think it is. The ballroom erupted into applause as the doors closed behind the bikers, the tension in the air dissolving like a passing storm. Emily turned to the bride and groom, offering them a reassuring smile. I'm sorry for the interruption, she said. But I promise, the rest of your night will be perfect. As the reception continued, Emily found herself the center of attention. Guests approached her with words of gratitude and admiration, some even joking that she should consider a career in law enforcement. But Emily just smiled and waved off the compliments. To her, this wasn't about being a hero, it was about doing what needed to be done. Later that evening, as she stood on the balcony overlooking the city, her assistant Lena joined her. I have to say, Lena said, handing her a glass of champagne, you really know how to make an impression. Emily chuckled, taking a sip. It's all in a day's work. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Lena spoke again. Do you think they'll come back? Emily's expression hardened, a glint of steel in her eyes. If they do, they'll regret it. The police had taken the gang into custody, but for Emily, the night wasn't over. As the reception continued and the newlyweds danced beneath a canopy of twinkling lights, Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket. She excused herself from a group of guests and stepped into the quiet hallway, where she glanced at the screen. A single message lit up the display. This isn't over. It was from an unknown number, but Emily didn't need to guess who had sent it. The leader of the Inferno Riders might have been dragged away in cuffs, but he was far from finished. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The bikers had underestimated her before, but now, she couldn't afford to underestimate them. She leaned against the wall, her mind racing. How far would they go? What more were they willing to do to make their point? The next few days were deceptively calm. The wedding had been a success despite the disruption, and Emily's clients were effusive in their praise. News of her handling of the bikers spread quickly, and her inbox overflowed with inquiries from people eager to book her services. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. She doubled down on her security measures, hiring more guards and working closely with local law enforcement. She even took precautions at her office, installing cameras and reinforcing the locks on the doors. Lena noticed the change in her demeanor. "You're on edge," she said one afternoon as they went over the schedule for an upcoming wedding. "Do you think they'll try something again?" Emily didn't answer right away. She stared at the calendar, her fingers tapping lightly against the desk. "They don't like losing," she said finally. "And they've already proven they're willing to go to great lengths to get what they want." "What are you going to do?" Lena asked. Emily looked up, her expression resolute. "Whatever it takes." Emily's opportunity to strike back came sooner than she expected. A few days later, while reviewing the layout for an outdoor reception, she received a tip from one of her new security contacts. "They're planning something big," the man said over the phone. "Word is, they're looking to make an example out of you." Emily's grip on the phone tightened. "When and where?" "Saturday night," the man replied. "They're targeting the fundraiser gala at the downtown hotel. It's high profile, lots of VIPs, perfect for making a scene." Emily's mind went into overdrive. The gala wasn't just any event, it was a major charity fundraiser with hundreds of attendees, including politicians, business leaders, and celebrities. If the bikers crashed it, the fallout would be catastrophic, not just for her reputation, but for everyone involved. But instead of panicking, Emily saw an opportunity. "Let them come," she said, a steely determination in her voice. "We'll be ready." In the days leading up to the gala, Emily worked tirelessly to prepare. She coordinated with the hotel staff, the event organizers, and her newly assembled security team, creating a detailed plan to handle the bikers when they inevitably arrived. She also reached out to her police contacts, ensuring they would be on standby. But Emily knew this wasn't just about calling the authorities, it was about showing the bikers that they couldn't intimidate her or anyone else. By the time Saturday night arrived, everything was in place. The grand ballroom was a picture of elegance, with shimmering decorations and tables set for a 5-course dinner. Guests arrived in evening gowns and tuxedos, mingling beneath the glittering chandeliers as a live band played softly in the background. Emily moved through the crowd with her usual poise, checking on the details and ensuring everything was running smoothly. But beneath her calm exterior, she was on high alert. It started with the faint rumble of engines, barely audible over the chatter and music. Emily glanced toward the entrance, her heart pounding. Within moments, the sound grew louder, and then the doors burst open. The bikers stormed in, their leather jackets and heavy boots a stark contrast to the formal attire of the guests. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as the leader strode forward, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Emily. "Nice party," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Mind if we join?" Emily stepped forward, her expression calm but unyielding. "You've made your point. Now leave." The leader chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, I don't think so. See, we're here to have a little fun. Maybe make a few donations of our own." He gestured toward the donation table, where guests had been placing checks and cash in a glass box. One of his crew members stepped forward, reaching for the box. But before he could grab it, 2 security guards intercepted him, their imposing presence stopping him in his tracks. The leader's smirk faltered. "Looks like you've learned a thing or two since last time," he said. "But let's see how far you're willing to go." Emily took a step closer, her voice steady and clear. "You think you can walk in here and take whatever you want? You think you can scare people into giving you what you want? Not tonight. Not ever again." The leader raised an eyebrow. "And what are you going to do about it?" Emily smiled, a small, confident smile that sent a ripple of unease through the bikers. "Look around," she said. The leader glanced around the room, his smirk fading as he noticed the plainclothes officers blending into the crowd, their stances tense and ready. The doors had been discreetly closed, and more security guards were stationed at every exit. "You're surrounded," Emily said. "And this time, there's no escape." The leader growled, his bravado giving way to anger. "You think you can outsmart us?" Emily didn't blink. "I already have." At her signal, the officers moved in, their badges flashing as they closed in on the bikers. The leader tried to resist, but he was quickly subdued, his crew following suit. The guests watched in stunned silence as the bikers were escorted out in handcuffs, their disruption cut short before it could escalate. As the room settled, a wave of applause erupted. Guests approached Emily, thanking her for her quick thinking and courage. But for Emily, it wasn't about the recognition. It was about standing up to those who thought they could bully and intimidate others without consequence. She stepped outside, taking a deep breath as the cool night air washed over her. Lena joined her, a look of admiration on her face. "You did it," Lena said. Emily smiled faintly. "We did it. And now they know they can't mess with us." As the night wore on and the gala continued without further incident, Emily reflected on everything that had led to this moment. She had faced intimidation, threats, and disruption, but she hadn't let any of it break her. Because sometimes, standing up to bullies isn't just about courage, it's about strategy, resilience, and the unwavering belief that justice will prevail. And Emily Dawson? She had all of that and more. The last of the bikers had been led out of the ballroom, their wrists bound tightly in handcuffs. The sound of their heavy boots clanking against the polished floor was drowned out by the hum of murmurs and excited chatter filling the room. The tension that had thickened the air since their arrival began to dissipate, replaced by a mixture of relief and awe from the guests who had witnessed the showdown. Emily watched as the last of the police officers closed the door behind them, signaling the end of the chaos. Outside, the night air was sharp with the scent of fresh rain, and the flashing lights from the police cruisers illuminated the parking lot in rhythmic pulses. The bikers' motorcycles, which had once seemed like symbols of power, were now impounded, their engines silent and still. The crew members who had caused so much disturbance were now facing the consequences of their actions. Inside the ballroom, the party continued, but with a new energy, a sense of unity, pride, and victory that filled the room. Emily stood at the center of it all, her calm demeanor unwavering. The guests, some of whom had been visibly shaken by the bikers' intrusion, were now relaxed, their chatter lively as the music resumed. It was almost as if the disruption had never happened. The bride, still in her wedding gown, approached Emily. Her eyes were brimming with gratitude, her smile wide and uncontainable. She pulled Emily into a tight hug. "I don't know how you did it," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "You saved our wedding, you saved the night." Emily's smile was soft but resolute. She pulled away just enough to look the bride in the eye. "It's my job," she said simply, though there was an unmistakable glint of pride in her gaze. "But, that was so much more than just a job," the bride insisted, still in awe. You were incredible." "Thank you," Emily replied, her tone warm but brief. She could feel the eyes of the guests on her, their admiration both humbling and empowering. It wasn't the applause she craved, it was the knowledge that she had protected something far more important than a simple event. She had ensured that this wedding, this special day, would be remembered for all the right reasons. As the night continued, Emily couldn't help but think about everything that had led to this moment. The bikers, full of swagger and arrogance, had walked into the event expecting to leave their mark in the most disruptive way possible. They had believed that fear would win them respect, that their presence would dominate the night. They were wrong. Emily had faced them with calm and strategy, not force. She had neutralized their threat without letting her emotions cloud her judgment, turning the tables on them in ways they never saw coming. By the time the last dance played, the guests were not just relaxed, they were deeply impressed. The news of the bikers' impromptu arrest and the way Emily had handled the situation would spread far and wide. Her reputation as a wedding planner would be sealed, but it was more than just a business triumph. It was a personal victory, one that solidified her place not only in the industry but in her own life. She had proven something not just to the bikers, but to herself. Her phone buzzed again, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from Lena. "Are you coming back to the office tomorrow? Things are busy." Emily smiled, shaking her head. Lena always had a way of finding humor in everything. But for now, she simply typed back, "I think we deserve a break." And with that, Emily tucked the phone back into her bag. She had done her part. The rest of the night was for celebration. As the last of the guests began to file out, Emily lingered near the door, greeting people as they left. She saw the couple who had been skeptical about her methods at the beginning of the evening. They approached her now, their faces filled with gratitude. "You were amazing," the groom said. "We can't believe how you handled that." Emily nodded, accepting the praise with grace. "I'm glad everything turned out well," she said. "I'm just happy you both had the day you deserved." One of the other guests, a businessman who had been near the front during the altercation, walked over to Emily as well. He extended a hand, his eyes still wide from the experience. "You've got something special, Emily," he said, his tone respectful. "I've worked with a lot of people in this industry, but I've never seen anyone handle a crisis like that. You've got a client for life if you ever need one." Emily smiled, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you," she said simply. The moment that would define Emily's career had passed, but her work wasn't over. She knew that. There were always new challenges on the horizon, new events to plan, new clients to serve. But she also knew that the power of the night wasn't in the applause or the praise, it was in the unspoken respect that followed the storm. And that was enough for her. As the lights dimmed in the ballroom and the last few stragglers made their way to the exit, Emily found herself alone for a moment. She stood near the edge of the dance floor, her eyes scanning the empty room. It was quieter now, the echoes of laughter and celebration lingering in the air. But in that silence, Emily felt a sense of peace. She had faced down the bikers, and in doing so, she had protected more than just the wedding. She had protected the integrity of the work she loved, the trust of her clients, and most importantly, her own sense of self. It was a feeling she hadn't realized she needed so much until now. The sound of the last few footsteps echoed in the hall, and Emily turned toward the door. Lena was waiting for her outside, her face alight with excitement. "Can you believe this night?" Lena asked, grinning. "You totally saved the day. I'm proud of you." "I just did my job," Emily said, her voice steady but soft. "But I think it's time to head home." The two women walked out together, their laughter filling the hallway as they made their way into the cool night. Emily took a deep breath, feeling a sense of satisfaction that was hard to put into words. For a moment, she allowed herself to savor it, the triumph, the relief, the justice served. And then, she let it go. Because for Emily Dawson, the fight was never over. There would always be another event to plan, another challenge to face, and another opportunity to show the world just how capable she truly was. And this time, she was ready. The night was winding down, and the last of the guests were making their way out of the venue. The soft murmur of goodbyes, the sound of shoes tapping across the polished floors, and the rustle of dresses and suits faded into the background. The chaotic energy of the day, the confrontation with the bikers, the tension and drama, all of it seemed to dissipate with each step. But as Emily stood in the now empty ballroom, the weight of everything that had happened was still with her. It was a weight she carried proudly, like a shield forged in fire. As the final lights dimmed, Emily stepped away from the crowd, retreating to a quiet corner of the venue. She paused for a moment, looking around the room that had been transformed into a battlefield and then back into a place of joy. It was here, in the quiet aftermath, that she found her peace. What she had done tonight wasn't about making a scene, taking revenge, or proving something to anyone. It wasn't even about making sure the wedding went smoothly, though that was always her goal. It was something deeper than that. It was about standing firm when everything around her threatened to fall apart. It was about protecting what mattered and refusing to let anyone push her down. The bikers thought they could walk in, take control, and ruin something special. They assumed that their loud motorcycles and rough exterior would intimidate everyone. But Emily had been different. She didn't shout. She didn't let anger take control. Instead, she stood steady, watching, calculating, waiting for the right moment to act. And when that moment came, she was ready not just to stop them, but to show them exactly who they were messing with. There was power in silence. There was strength in calm. Emily knew that now. She had known it for years, but tonight, she had seen it in action. She had seen how her quiet strength had not only saved a wedding but earned the respect of everyone who had witnessed it. She hadn't raised her voice, but she had made her point loud and clear. In a world that often rewarded loudness, aggression, and showmanship, Emily had shown that true power often doesn't need to shout. Sometimes, strength isn't about how loud you roar, it's about how steady you stand when everything around you is in chaos. It's about not letting the noise distract you from your purpose. It's about knowing when to step up and take control and when to stand back and let your actions speak for themselves. For so long, Emily had been seen as the quiet, behind-the-scenes woman. The wedding planner no one noticed until something went wrong. People underestimated her all the time. They saw her as small, soft-spoken, and easily overlooked. But that was their mistake. What they didn't see was the fire beneath the surface, the determination and the strength that pulsed through her every move. In her work, she had learned to deal with difficult people, challenging situations, and impossible odds. Every mishap, every crisis, was an opportunity for Emily to prove her worth. She didn't need validation from anyone, because deep down, she knew what she was capable of. And she knew that, in the end, her actions would speak louder than any words ever could. Tonight, she had been tested in a way she never expected. And she had passed with flying colors. But what truly mattered to Emily was the respect she had earned not through force, but through grace, patience, and careful strategy. She had won, not because she had fought harder, but because she had fought smarter. She had kept her calm in the face of chaos and had come out victorious, proving to herself that she didn't need to shout to be heard. Emily didn't need to prove herself to anyone. She let her actions do the talking, and those who underestimated her? Well, they learned their lesson the hard way. The bikers who had barged in with their arrogance, thinking they could take over, had been shown exactly what happens when you mess with the wrong person. And it wasn't just the bikers who had learned something that night. The guests, the bride and groom, the staff, everyone had witnessed the quiet power Emily possessed. There were many kinds of strength in this world. Some people were loud, brash, and always at the center of attention. But not everyone needed to be. Some people thrived in the background, their strength hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the moment to rise up. And when that moment came, they were ready to meet it head-on. Emily had never been the type to seek the spotlight. She didn't need the praise or recognition. What mattered to her was doing her job well, making sure people had what they needed, and making sure the day went smoothly for everyone involved. She was there to serve, to make things happen, to hold the space together when everything else seemed to be falling apart. But tonight, the world had seen a different side of Emily. They had seen her stand tall, unshaken, and unmoved in the face of chaos. They had seen her transform from the quiet planner to the calm force who refused to back down. And Emily was okay with that. She had learned something important: real strength wasn't about power over others. It was about having control over yourself, about standing firm even when the world around you was crumbling. It was about having the confidence to face what seemed impossible and knowing that you had what it took to overcome it. No one knew her story, no one knew the quiet battles she had fought before this night. But they would never forget this one. It wasn't just about the bikers being escorted out in handcuffs. It wasn't just about the applause or the admiration. It was about the lesson that Emily had taught everyone in that room, that real strength comes from within, and it's the kind of strength that no one can take away from you, no matter how much they try. As Emily left the venue that night, she didn't walk away with a sense of victory for the sake of victory. She walked away with something far more powerful. She walked away with the knowledge that she could handle whatever came her way, no matter how chaotic or unpredictable. She had faced the storm, and instead of being swept away by it, she had weathered it, stronger than ever. That night, Emily Dawson didn't just win a battle. She won the right to stand tall, to be seen, and to be heard. And that, she knew, was the greatest victory of all. Sometimes, you don't need to roar. You just need to stand firm, let your actions speak for themselves, and trust that the world will take notice.